Good morning, everybody. So I know folks are getting settled, trickling in. Thank you for joining us. We have a few folks here joining us today from MDH. So we'll be introducing them here shortly. But to get us kind of started and warmed up, we wanted to ask a short icebreaker question just to get everybody's brains working first thing in the morning. Well, it's not first thing for y'all probably, but it is for me, I guess. And so I'm going to put the question in the chat box. But the question would be is if you could see one movie again, right? So if there is one movie you could see again for the first time, what would it be and why? So I don't know if anybody has a movie that they just absolutely love that they could watch again for the first time and really enjoy. I think for me, I don't know about I don't remember the first time that I saw it, so I'm not, it didn't stand out in that way, but I loved Steel Magnolias, and I used to watch it all the time with my mom before she passed away. So if that, I imagine I watched it with her for the first time. So if that was a movie to watch for the first time, I think I would do that. Of course, I would watch it anytime, but the first time would be fun too. I don't know if anybody else would love to share a movie that they watch again for the first time or that they just really like watching over and over again. Oh, Susan said Beaches. Yes, that's a good one too. I forgot about that one. I watched that with my mom too. That's such a good one too. Good call. Oh, Shelley says The Joy Luck Club. That's a good one too. Nidra, The Color Purple. Nidra, I read the book, The Color Purple, and it was just as good as the movie. It was fantastic. Kathy says The Notebook. That's a good movie too. I like it. Hey. I love that these are all kind of like older movies, like our generation movies. I haven't seen anything that's super new yet, but of course unless you can afford the rental right now, but the new movies coming out, they're pretty expensive to rent. I guess about the same as if you were to go to the movies with someone else, but we're cheap over here, so we haven't rented any brand new movies that have come out. I know Siboney was saying that she and her husband would do date night, once a week or a few times a month and go to the movies before the pandemic. And I think that that's something a lot of people are really looking forward to doing. All right, great. Thanks for sharing. And if you're just joining us, we're just starting with a quick icebreaker question. And we're asking everybody, if you could see one movie again for the first time, what movie would it be? Brady says the Topper series, really old, back in the 30s and 40s. I'll have to take a look. I looked it up. I know TLC is one of my favorite stations. They have some movies from the 30s and 40s that are a little bit, were I guess probably considered a little risque. Those ones are pretty good. Okay. Well, so this morning we are going to be talking about safe sleeping. I'm just trying to get this to work here. So we have a few things on deck. Okay, thanks, Juanita. We'll just kind of take our time, but they can come in as they go along. This meeting is being recorded, so we can share that with them if they can catch up with what they missed. So today we are going to talk about family spirit screenings and assessment recommendations. So we'll open up with that. MDH is going to take it from there and talk a little bit about screening and reporting overview. So kind of what happens with those screenings on their end. We have a presentation about intimate partner violence and using the CUES model. We'll also go into the creation of some tools that will help with screenings and assessments for your programs, and how we can provide support to develop those out that are individual for your sites. And then we'll end with kind of just having some conversation about considerations related to trauma and screenings, right? We know that sometimes they could be a little bit triggering, so we want to definitely flesh that out. Are there any questions before we move on? All right, wonderful. And as always, this is we're pretty informal here for the most part. So we're in the meeting format of Zoom. If you have a question or you want to make a comment, feel free to chime in either via chat or verbally by unmuting. So, we are all comfortable here and happy for you to just kind of interrupt if you have something you want to share or if you have a question, okay? All right, so to start us off, talking a little bit about screenings and assessments and kind of what those mean, like what does that look like? Why do we do screenings? So one thing that I hear a lot from sites is that they have sometimes they experience some low retention of families and high attrition. So attrition means families leaving the program before they have finished or completed the entire program. And retention means, keeping families. But we know that when we do those assessments, when we sit down and do these with families, the research shows that if we do them pretty early on in the family's enrollment in the program, it really opens up a chance for relationship building because we're getting an opportunity to learn a lot about families and their lives and also the needs that they have. Retention and attrition has really been attributed to the relationship building that goes into the family and the program, the family and the home visitor, but also the home visitor and the program and the home visitor and their supervisor, right? So when we do these screenings and assessments, it helps us learn what the family needs. And if we are able to address those needs early on, families will kind of feel that, their needs are being met or addressed, and they'll feel more motivated to stay in the program. This is kind of what the research has said over the years. But we know when we sit down to do these assessments and we're asking these questions, it is inevitably uncomfortable, right, at times, but it really gives us an opportunity to look through a window or a door to things that the family has experienced and get to know them. And so just beyond kind of identifying needs and making resources, that's kind of what we see at the top. We know that that's definitely a reason for screenings and assessments, but really what underlies that is that relationship building and the opportunity to get to know the family. And we know that if we identify issues early on, either in the program or early on in the child's life, and we can connect them with services, that means that they'll be able to address them sooner. And we can provide support that is tailored to those needs. Are there any questions about, screenings and assessments or kind of why we do them? I think we're all pretty familiar with this. I just really wanted to hone in on this, how it relates to this idea of relationship building that is so core to Family Spirit and the work that we do. All right, so we're going to start off with Family Spirit screening and assessment recommendations. So in what is it called? The implementation guide in your boxes for your Family Spirit, the curriculum boxes. In that implementation guide, there is a Family Spirit evaluation overview. And I will also share this with you via PDF. But this really outlines a lot of the evaluation components that go into Family Spirit in terms of kind of the paperwork stuff, right? And at the bottom of this document outlines the assessments that we do for moms and dads or the parents, caregivers, and then those assessments and screenings that we do with kiddos. This is really going to also help in assisting to monitor the model, the outcomes, right? So as we screen, we can see kind of the changes that are occurring as we're doing these, providing these services and the lessons to families. And that's, definitely something that we want to see from a funder level, or just, is this working, right? This document also outlines the time points. So when are we doing each of these assessments? When is this coming up? So that we can plan and prepare to do those with families. And at the end is really that Family Spirit has recommendations, but every program, every site is very unique and diverse. And so there may be an assessment that you're focused on because that is related to an issue that is very prevalent in your community, like substance use or suicide prevention or housing, right? So your program might really focus on this assessment, and the other ones, you know, are not that high of a priority. But overall, Family Spirit works with the site to determine what assessments that you want to do out of the ones that we recommend. Of course, you could do every single one. That is definitely possible. But for some sites, they choose which ones are more relevant to their services. So I'm going to open this up really quickly so we can kind of go through this together. So let me just switch over really quickly. All right, so hopefully everybody can see this. I'm gonna pull it down just a little bit. This is that evaluation overview that I was mentioning, right? So here's the top of it. And as you go through, you see that these are process measures, so related to the evaluation. And these are those forms that you do, right? Like you do document each visit and tracking participants and all this good stuff. So if we move down here and we get to screening and outcome measures for mothers, and we'd like to say mothers or fathers or caregivers. And these are the ones that, you know, Family Spirit recommends. The ones that are starred are directly related to the outcomes of the model. But so, for example, at the top here, we have the demographic form. We have an example demographic form, a template that sites are welcome to use, but oftentimes you may already have one that is used for other services in your program or other services in your site. So, you know, this is one that we do right off the bat with families to give us an idea of, you know, just their general information, the who, what, where, when, how, right? And typically, so the first and last visit, and then every 6 months. So, you know, in our program, we did it at the first visit that we did with a family once we knew that they were going to be enrolled in the program. And then we would do it once a year to kind of update anything around if there's any new children in the home, if there's a new partner in the house, if they've moved, all that good stuff. And then going next is the postpartum form, and this is done after delivery. So it says within 2 weeks of delivery, and this one's really going to look at information regarding the birth of the baby. So it's kind of demographic for that birth. Next is a comprehensive knowledge assessment, and this is very similar to when you trained for Family Spirit and had those 5 questions per lesson. This is kind of all of those put into 40 items. It's a 40 item knowledge assessment. And we recommend that programs do this at the first and last visit and then every 6 months. And where this happens, or what happens here, is it shows us some like pre and post. So what has the family learned as you've gone through the lessons? And we kind of see that change in knowledge. And that's really helpful for programs, and a lot of other funders want to see that. Related to that are these independent knowledge assessments. So they're broken down. Most programs pick one or the other, right? We do have the maternal depression scales. So there are, you know, you might be familiar, there's a ton of different ways to assess depression. The PHQ-9 is a very common one that they use in the clinic. Hopefully, can everybody still hear me? Okay, sorry, I had just my headphone made a weird noise. So what we do definitely recommend is that you choose a depression screening or a depression scale and then use that consistently. So here we talk about, this is related to postpartum depression and maternal depression. So for example, the Edinburgh scale is one that is very common. And I'm just actually going to change this. Hopefully this works a little bit better. So the Edinburgh scale is one that I know we used in our program. It worked really well. It says every 2 months, including the first and last visit. And when we're looking at maternal depression, particularly postpartum, you know, you may determine kind of what that looks like for your program. We did it during the last trimester, and then every 3 months for the first year in case maternal or postpartum depression occurred or developed. And found that really helpful. And it was, you know, then we would refer them off. There's also a social emotional assessment that is recommended by Family Spirit. This is the Eckenbach system. So, you know, it's a 112 self-report scale, so it is kind of long, right? And it could be really helpful in determining kind of where parents are socially and emotionally, and how we can support them in relating to the kiddos. And so, you know, taking a look at this one would be really helpful if you feel that it would be a useful piece to your program. And then we have the one that we recommend for alcohol and drug use is the VOICE. So VOICE is of Indian teens, and it could be, you know, adapted to use with adults as well. But again, there are several alcohol and substance use screenings to use. I know SAMHSA provides a lot of those as well. So this is just one example. And again, we recommend that first and last visit, and then every 6 months. We have the parent self-efficacy and competence scale that's recommended by Family Spirit. I'll just say that this is really one that I appreciated in our program, because it kind of told us where parents were, or where they felt that they were on in terms of their parenting skills. We know that we want to really take the lead from families as we go along, and so this kind of provided a little bit of insight into how they feel about their own parenting skills. And again, we're looking at every 6 months, beginning at 6 months postpartum, is what, again, kind of adapting that for your program. Then there's the parent stress scale. That's, you know, a similar one, and we're using the Parent Stress Index, which is a evidence-based tool. Moving on to parent-child interaction. This is another component that is really important in terms of supporting families in improving or developing healthy parenting skills, right? So we recommend the use of the Piccolo, and beginning at 12 months postpartum, and then every 6 months, we recommend this tool. Going on to domestic violence, so Family Spirit recommends the HITS tool. It's another evidence-based tool that looks at domestic violence and intimate partner violence. But again, I know with this one, there are obviously several tools that are available and out there. So choosing which one works best for your program and is easiest to use. Okay. Injury prevention. So as you go through the Family Spirit lessons, you'll see that throughout, you know, we have lessons on child safety and home safety as the child grows, right? And so we're assessing and looking at components that are related to that child's age and their development. But there's also this larger scale that you can do with families routinely. And so this says every 6 months, again, including the first and last visit. But then we also have a note here that there are scans and checks that are built into the lessons. And then here's a medical chart review form. And this is really not as commonly used, but it's very helpful, particularly with those programs that have a direct link with the medical department and are working closely with providers. So those are kind of those caregiver and parent and adult assessments. And then we move into measures for the children. So what assessments are we using specifically with the kiddos? The first one is the child development screening. And I think MDH really provides a lot of support in using the ASQ system. That is very broadly across the Family Spirit Network. That's the one that's most used. In my personal experience, it's very easy to use. It's a lot of fun to do with families. The kids love to do the little activities. And for parents who really are open to it, they can do the assessments themselves, right? So it's something that is easy to use. And so for child development assessments, we're looking at every 2 months, beginning at 2 months postpartum. But for the ASQ system, it really depends on the sequence that is outlined in their system. So I know it changes a little bit as the child grows. Then we have, that's development, right? So we're looking at with their gross motor skills, fine motor skills, all that good stuff. But there's also this idea of monitoring children's social and emotional development. So we named two tools here. One is the BITSI tool, and then one is the Ages and Stages social and emotional component. So, choosing which one works best for your program and then implementing that regularly. It's going to look at their behavior, their emotional development, and their well-being, right? Emotional well-being. And then again, is this medical chart review form related to the connection that we have with the medical department, and looking at if there is anything that we has changed or any major medical issues that have come up, right? And this one says after participant exit. All right, so that is what we're looking at for the these assessments and screenings recommended by Family Spirit. And again, some programs, will use every single one here, and then other programs will pick and choose which ones work best for them. The really important thing to think about is using it consistently, right? So are we implementing this consistently so that we can monitor those changes and identify any challenges that occur, and then in a very timely manner, support families in connecting with resources. That's really the key to assessments. And so whether you choose all of these or ones that are specifically related to the challenges or experiences that you are seeing in your families or in your community as a whole. And we can always, kind of support programs in developing that plan. I like to, with programs I've worked with, and I think we did this with Mille Lacs, right? We had kind of a matrix similar to this where we outlined which ones that they were going to use and then when they were going to be done, so that the family had a kind of a check, or the health educator had a check-off sheet that they could use with each family. And we're happy to kind of work on something like that with your programs if that's something you might find helpful. Any questions or thoughts about this? So I'm going to pause for a moment too. This is a lot of information, so I want to make sure that everybody feels comfortable kind of before we move on.
Okay. We have different tools that we use in our program, but there's a couple of these that I do use. But since right now we don't have space for like office space for us, I have not been requiring them to use any kind of tools other than the one that we have created for our daily work stuff, so that they can report to me what happened during the day and their clients and things like that. So until we get into our space, for the staff that are listening in, that are working with me, we will redo this. We will come back to this and retrain on this the minute that we are free and got some space when we get into our building. So don't worry about it, but this is really a good thing to look at, because there is a few of these tools that we do use, and especially for our quarterlies. So.
Great, thanks for that, Bertie. And that you made a great point, is that these are the tools that are recommended for Family Spirit, but your agency, your clinic, your program might have other tools that you're required to use by your funder or by the tribe or whatnot. And so usually what we see is for each site or affiliate that there might be a combination of things, right? This isn't the whole list, or maybe you only have a couple of things out of here and a couple of things from over here. The four categories that we look at for, the four general categories that we look at for screening and assessments really include that we want to hit, whether we're using these tools or other tools, is depression and mental health, right? So suicide prevention and all that good stuff. And then alcohol and substance use. I'm sorry, there are five: alcohol and substance use, intimate partner violence, child development, and then parent-child interaction. So those are the five kind of categories that we want to look at, and then determining what tools are you using to address those issues, right? Okay, so at this point, I think we're going to hand it over to Minnesota. Are you folks ready to take the helm?
Yeah.
Yes, and
Good
who are you wanting?
morning.
And yes, hi, and Jennifer. I just want to introduce everybody. This is Carla to Jennifer Haynes. And Jennifer, tell us about your work at MDH and what you do.
Yeah, so I work with Ginny Zavistowski, who's also on the call. I'm in the Family Home Visiting Evaluation Group. And so we do a lot of the data analysis and reporting on the evaluation of the programs that for the grants that we give out. So yeah, I do a lot of data. I've never done anything on home visiting. So it's always really interesting to come to these meetings and kind of learn about the real work that's going on behind all these numbers. So thanks so much for letting me join. And yeah, and so what I can do, I don't know, Ginny, do you want to also introduce yourself? Because we're going to kind of tag team, and then we can give our presentation. If that's okay, I can share my screen too.
Okay. Yeah. While Jennifer's figuring out the technology side of Zoom with Tara, I think, I'll say good morning to everyone. So good morning to you all. My name is Ginny Zavistowski. I supervise the evaluation team for family home visiting at MDH. So it's good to see and your names and faces, some familiar faces. And I look forward to being able to see people in person again, because it's been a while, and some of you that I have not had the opportunity to meet with in a while. So yeah, like Jennifer was saying, what we do, and this, we work with those of you who are funded through our state's evidence-based home visiting grant funding. So I think a lot of what we're going to talk about pertains to those of you who are funded by our program. I do realize that this is a broader group, and that not everyone here necessarily is doing Family Spirit under the state evidence-based home visiting funding. So just want to preface with that. So it looks like, all right, we have a couple slides, and it's a very short presentation. We're very informal about this. So let's see. So Jennifer, if you wouldn't mind going to like the second slide, that would be great. So so for those of you who, I guess maybe would be worth starting with a little background about of what we do collect for programs that are funded by MDH, and what we do with that information. So we get money from, that's allocated by the state legislature. We do also have some federal MCFI funding. We're not funding any Family Spirit programs with that MCFI funding at the moment. So any of you who are getting funding from us are receiving this evidence-based funding. We collect data so that, we can report back to, the legislature, other stakeholders, say, hey, here are, as we look at the effectiveness and the work that home visiting is happening statewide, there are home visitors are screening families, let's say for depression, and, connecting families to services. Those are all like really excellent outcomes of home visiting that we want to make sure that we are sharing, across grantees with our stakeholders, so that they can continue to fund us, so that we can continue to fund all of the work that you're doing. So the role that data collection and evaluation plays, it's to continue to communicate the value of funding this program and showing its effectiveness. So that is at the heart of why we require evaluation data collection for our grant funded programs. At the same time, your teams and your health educators are working so hard to collect information on those families. And this is your data as well. This is your program's data. And our team wants to be able to create reports for you that will meet your program's needs. We take data requests. And some of you who've been working with us know that about a year ago, we brought a new data system online that's called IVY, Information for Home Visiting Evaluation. So it's kind of an odd little acronym. So the data that is sent to IVY, that if families do consent to having that family shared, we can use that data to create reports specifically for your needs. And Jennifer has a couple of kind of mocked up examples of, a couple of, fairly simple reports we can do. We're happy to meet with you and talk about, is there something a little bit more complicated that would be useful to you? Because we have a newer data system that enables us to do a lot more than what we could do before, because our old data systems were just incredibly challenging for everyone to work with, including us. I think a couple of examples that we have to share, if you needed information about demographic characteristics about the families that you're working with, or if you needed to know more detailed information to know, okay, so who have you screened recently, that might help to decide, okay, well, who needs to be screened next as you're doing your planning of visits with families. So there's a variety of different reports and information that we could put together for you. I also do want to note that we are required by state and federal law to protect any data that is shared with us from your programs. So if there is reports that we make for you that have private data, we will not and cannot share those with other grantees or the public. So for example, if we did a report for, Mille Lacs Band of Ojibwe, we can't share that with Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe because it's not their clients. That's like, there's data protections in place. So that's what I wanted to share about that. And I think I'll hand it over to Jennifer to talk about, some examples of at least some of the things that we could do. And PowerPoints are always fun because you have to it always likes to switch your window and
Unmute. Okay. All right. So sorry, I was trying to figure out how to unmute myself, and yeah. Okay. So thanks. Yeah. So I just put together some example reports that we've been generating for other sites. These are kind of mock-ups with pretend data. But yeah, so like Jenny was saying, this is an example report just showing some demographics for child participants, so different what age groups are being served by your program, the different ages, and we've got the total and then the percentage. So if that's interesting, but we can also do other demographics. This is just one example. And then another example that I looked at, kind of going along with the child theme, was this the ASQ screenings. So what this is again just a pretend data I made up here, but it's just a report that shows all the local participant IDs in the program. This is for children, so it's got their birth date and then their enrollment date, and then just a question: has the child been screened in 6 months? And I know that some of those ASQs are done every 2 months, so we could change it to 2 months as well. And then if they have, what's the date of their most recent ASQ screen? So these two got a screening in the past 6 months, and then these 3 didn't. So that might be, if that's something that's helpful to kind of keep track of, oh, hey, these people are up for a screening, maybe, that's something that we could do. This is just all about getting ASQ screenings, but, if there's other screenings that are more interesting, whatever your program is focusing on, we can modify it for that. And like I said, too, the time periods, we can change those around. And like Ginny said, if there's other things that would be more useful, this is a pretty simple report, but if there's other things that you're interested in kind of digging into, then we're happy to talk with you about that, and see what kinds of things we could create to help look more into the data. So yeah, with that, I'm happy to take questions and just, share Ginny and Ginny's information and then our team email here. So yeah.
Yeah. I think, Tara, if there are questions, I think we do have a few minutes, right? Or yeah, okay, thanks.
Okay. Yeah.
Bonjour, this is Susan. Hi, Jeannie.
Good morning.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to say how the Ivy is going to be really helpful for our data entry for our program at Red Lake. And thank you for all the work that you've done with our team to get us trained and started on doing that data entry. Thank you.
You're welcome. We are excited to be working with your team and to see, things launching and families starting to be served. So yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Great. Well, and I think, well, your emails are here, but Ginny and Jennifer, I don't know if you want to put them in the chat box. That way people have them, they can kind of just
Yeah,
copy
I
and
will do
paste.
that. Yeah, yeah. I'll have
Perfect.
those right now. Yeah, so I'll just stop.
That may be helpful. And then that way, and as I imagine that as questions come up when you're actually doing data and doing entry, taking these screens and stuff, that you can give them a holler too.
Yeah.
I think another thing that might be worth noting is that, I think the agencies, that your programs are housed in, I think, vary pretty widely in what sorts of, resources you have available. I think some of you do have staff that are actually pretty awesome data scientists and data analysts themselves, and some of the others don't always have the same resources. So I think, another thing that I'm grateful for is that, Jennifer and I, we have a team that has a lot of experience and expertise working with data. So even if it wasn't data that we actually have that is part of MDH reporting, if you just wanted to consult around, like, say you needed to put together a report for, one of your stakeholders, and if it would be helpful just to kind of talk through, well, how would you do that? That's another form of technical assistance we could offer as well. So, so just wanted to put that out there, that we want home visiting and we want Family Spirit in Minnesota to be successful. And a lot of times, people look at this kind of data as how they measure success, just knowing that this is not the only way to measure success, but it is one of those ways that, funders do use to measure success. So whatever we can do to help with that, I think, let's talk about that. So thank you.
Serena, I see you're unmuted. Yeah. Did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, unfortunately I ended up having to take a call from a family in a crisis situation, and I missed some of the screening tool, which I was wondering. I see the screening tools, and I've tried to use some of them, but I'm not seeing like the key for the screening tool. Where can I find that? Does that make sense?
Is that a question for me or for Tara?
I don't know, whoever's got an answer.
Yeah,
because I've done screening, especially like on intimate person partner violence and all those things. So luckily I have that knowledge, but I'm trying to find that, line it up in like the Family Spirit curriculum, or like however we're doing it in this way. That's what I'm interested in.
That's a great question, Serene. So we went over the the recommendations for Family Spirit in the categories that we have for screening and the different tools that we recommend. And so each tool has its own kind of key and what score means what. And so it depends on the actual tool, but we can sit down and look at that overview and kind of what you want to use, which of those screens you want to use for your site. And then, what happens what does it mean for somebody to score like positive or whatnot? Does that make sense? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, that would be great. The ones I'm most interested in are the depression scale, like maternal. And is there a paternal one too, or are you developing one?
So the ones that we use for depression, right? Let me just pull this up again and I'll share it again because this is a great question. So for depression, we look at, and of course it says maternal, right? But there's the CESDR, which that one is not specific to gender. So female or male could be either one. We also know that the PHQ-9 or the PHQ, there's a couple of them, there's 3, 6, and 9, I believe, are also not gender specific. However, this Edinburgh postnatal one, that is obviously for moms because we're looking at postpartum depression. So you could use either or both. It really just depends on the needs for your program. And then we can definitely look at that more in depth together too. And maybe it's both. You use the one for dad and one for mom, or the moms, either or.
Great. I've tried to find this, if you could send it to me, because I'm probably just missing it, I would appreciate it.
Yep. Yeah, I think I attached it to the email I sent out this morning, but I'm gonna just put it in the chat box now so that everybody can have it there too. And then hopefully you'll be able to download it. Okay, so let me know if that comes up. It says successful on my end, but that doesn't mean much. So great question. Thanks, Serene. Any other questions before we move on? These are wonderful.
I have one. On the depression scale, is that just for the parents? Do they have anything on kids?
That's a great question. So I know that Family Spirit does not have one listed for youth, but I know that there is I think it's a PHQ for youth that is available. So I can look that up, or if anybody else has an answer for that one. I think, was that you, Carla?
Yeah, so the other thing that we do is, we don't have a validated tool that we use for childhood depression screening through MDH, but we do use the ASQSE, and Sue Avey, our next speaker, is going to talk a little bit about that. And while it's not a depression screening, it is a social emotional screening that would pick up on those concerns, as I understand. But that is a great, we'll put that question to Sue, who actually is trained on ASQ and is going to talk about that. So a great question.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Natalie. And that one is a really good tool. It goes up to age 5. So, we can definitely, hopefully Sue will have something around like that 5 to adult age bracket, right? But we definitely want to be screening for that. And I know that there's something out there because there's a lot on youth suicide prevention. Hi. All right. So with that, I guess we can hand it over to Sue. Sue, are you here with us? Do you feel comfortable sharing your screen? You're all.
Yep, I think I can do that. Just want to make sure here. And if folks can let me know if they are seeing my PowerPoint screen.
Yes.
Yep, you are? Okay, perfect. All right. So my name is Sue Avey, and I am one of the family home visiting consultants similar to Carla. There's currently 3 of us. Carla serves the tribes, and she is located out of the Bemidji office, as you guys all know. I am located out of the Fergus Falls office, and my geographical area that I serve is West Central and Southwestern part of the state. I'm happy to join you today, and I have just a presentation here on intimate partner violence screening during virtual home visits. So what I want to start with is just a little bit of grounding in what we're talking about. And I just want to talk about a definition first of what is intimate partner violence. So intimate partner violence is when one person in a relationship is using a pattern of methods and tactics to gain and maintain power and control over the other person. What we know about intimate partner violence is that it's a cycle, and it often gets worse over time. It's not just a one-time incident. We also know that abusers often use jealousy, mental health issues, money, and other strategies to be controlling and abusive. It's not just about physical violence. And we also know that leaving an abusive relationship is not always the best, the safest, or the most realistic option for survivors. And I also just want to talk about that intimate partner violence is common. And we know that 1 in 4 women and 1 in 9 men experience intimate partner violence at some point in their life, and that the highest risk ages are 18 to 24, and a high percentage of at-risk are mothers as well. So the population that you serve as a family home visitor is certainly an at-risk population for intimate partner violence. Now I want to get specifically in talking about screening. Because you guys, many of you are MDH grantees, you are asked to screen all of your primary caregivers for intimate partner violence. But even during in-person visits, the best practice is only to screen if it's safe for the client to do so. Because client safety is always the first priority, it should never be compromised just to check off that box that we did the screening. During a virtual visit, we know it's often impossible for the home visitor to know that the client is alone. And so in most cases, we would not recommend using a screening. And I believe that it's the HITS that's recommended by Family Spirit, but MDH also has approved the HARC or the RAT as different screening tools that can be used for intimate partner violence. But in most cases with a virtual visit, we would not recommend that you do the screening. We always need to remember that the client should never be screened when a partner is present, or should not be screened in the presence of other family members, including children that are verbal. We've all had experience with children or grandchildren or nieces or nephews who overhear us say something and repeat it to somebody, and we wish they wouldn't. So we just need to remember that not only do we need to be concerned about not screening in front of a partner, but we also shouldn't screen in front of any family members or children who are verbal. And even if you as the home visitor can assure on the virtual visit that the client is alone, we should still always ask permission if it's a safe time for them to be able to talk about their relationship with us before starting a screening. Are there other options besides doing a screening? Well, we at MDH fully expect to see very low rates of IPV screening during this time of virtual visits. You still are going to need to report this data, but following best practice is what's most important, and making sure the client is safe. And we want to assure you that there won't be any negative impacts on you as a grantee or on your funding if you haven't completed the screenings. Oftentimes when a structured screening tool is used at enrollment, it does really little to promote a woman disclosing that she's in a violent situation, because as you well know, that relationship isn't well established early on in home visiting. And what research has shown is that when a home visitor opens up discussion to just talk about relationships and healthy relationships, that is often a way to build that trust, and it builds on the relationship. And hopefully at some point then, if the woman is experiencing violence in her life, that's something she'll feel comfortable talking about. Having a discussion that provides universal education is a much safer and often more effective approach, especially during virtual visits. And I'm going to talk a little bit about one specific intervention called CUES in just a few moments on how you could do that or approach the universal education. Another option may be to provide a general support related to COVID and use the United Way 211 as a resource, especially if you have reason to believe that the woman may be in an unsafe situation. It's often a good choice to refer through United Way 211. Sometimes in an abusive situation, the abuser is tracking phone use or texting or phone calls. And if you would refer a client to a national domestic violence hotline or to Day One, the Minnesota Crisis Hotline, they could track that on their phone or see that they've been doing that. But a referral to 211, you can request information about food, about transportation, about general parenting kinds of needs, but it also can be used as a safe proxy for someone to access support for stressful relationships. So that's another option that you can think about using. So let's talk specifically about CUES. What I mentioned is an intervention to provide universal education. And in CUES, the C stands for confidentiality, and the confidentiality piece of CUES just wants us to convey that we need to be talking to the client alone and to disclose what your requirements or what your beliefs are about confidentiality. You might say something like, I want you to know that everything that we talk about is confidential, meaning I won't talk to anyone else about what you share with me, except if you tell me about an instance that I'm mandated to report, for example, child abuse and neglect. So that sets the stage to make the client feel safe, but it also reiterates what you as a mandated reporter might need to share. The U and the E stands for universal education and empowerment. The universal piece of this is we really want to normalize this. And so you may want to start with something, and we use a card for doing this. And I'll talk a little bit more specifically about the cards too. But you may want to start the conversation by saying, I started using these cards and I give 2 cards to all of my clients. And it gives us an opportunity to talk about safe and healthy relationships. The card that I'm going to talk a little bit about today is one that is available for free download from the internet, and the handout that I provided to Carla will have the direct links for you guys to be able to look at these cards. Some of you may also be familiar, and I don't happen to have one here with me, but you may be familiar with the Native American cards that are actually available from Futures Without Violence. And it's a real similar card, and you can use that one for CUES as well. The one I'm going to talk through today is a card that's been developed here in Minnesota, and it's called Safety During a Public Health Crisis. But you'd approach it with any card that you used kind of in the same way, and just share that, we share these with all our clients so that people don't feel like they're singled out. And the first panel, when you open up the card, talks about healthy relationships, and that's part of a strength-based approach. And so you may want to introduce this in saying, during a public health crisis, like right what it says in the card, strong and safe relationships are very vital. And these are just some characteristics of safe relationships, and talk about those with your clients. As you all well know, many of our clients may not know what a healthy relationship looks like. It may not have been something that they had in the past or that they saw between their parents. So that what a healthy relationship is may be something new to them. So we want to make sure that we start with the positive and share that. Another good tactic when using these cards is to talk about safety in general, in a broader sense, to start with. And this pandemic has kind of given us a unique opportunity to talk about that. I think all of us are feeling much more isolated, much more alone. There's more anxiety, there's more depression, that's much more common. So asking about how they feel in their community. Do they feel safe in their community? And, then do they feel safe with in their home. Is their home a safe place? Is it in a safe neighborhood? And then talking about their relationships. So starting with broad and bringing it into more narrow. Sometimes these cards can also be helpful to introduce the screening tool later on. This is kind of a first opportunity to talk about healthy relationships. And as the relationship develops with your client, then saying, you know, we've talked about healthy relationships when I shared those cards with you. And today I'd kind of like to talk specifically about your relationship and how healthy is your relationship. Would it be okay if we did this screening tool? Again, remembering that you need to assure that the client is alone and that it's a safe time to do that. The empowerment piece comes for when you give these cards and talking about, you know, you may have a friend or a family member who needs to learn more about healthy relationships, or you may have a friend or a family member who's in an unhealthy relationship. And this is a way that you can share information with them as well. And then, you know, making sure that they understand you're a safe person. If your relationship seems unsafe, or if you know somebody who's in an unsafe relationship, remembering I'm a safe person to talk to about that. And that leads right into the S, or the support, in making sure that you can point out the resources that are on the back of the card, and that may include your information as well, because you can certainly customize this to include whatever information you want. And then knowing that you're a safe person, and remembering that the goal here is to be supportive, and it's not to push for disclosure. So we're just providing universal education and allowing the client to soak that in, and respecting the client's judgment about what they do or don't want to share with you. So one of the things that I'd really recommend is, depending on whatever card you choose to use with your program, I would really recommend that you pair up with someone and practice using the card. Even write out a script of what you might say. We don't want to necessarily sound like we're reading a script when we're meeting with clients, but having practiced it and having thought out in your head how you're going to say things and how you're going to introduce things will make you more comfortable with using the cards with a client. And then with virtual visits, now that most of us are involved in, you can ask the client if you'd like them, if they'd like you to send out a couple cards in the mail, or to drop them off, or to put them somewhere where they can pick them up, or even send them digitally. But always make sure you ask if it's safe for them to have the cards before you do that. Let's see. One other thing that you might want to think about as you're practicing with someone else is thinking about how you might suggest to the client that it would be great if you could have a time where you could talk privately and where you could share privately. So sharing some ideas with the clients on how that might happen, like, would it ever work for you to like talk on the phone for our visit while you're in the car by yourself? Or do you have a space where you can go where others aren't around, where we can just talk privately, or maybe going out for a walk and talking with them during that time? So that's kind of some ideas on how you might want to use the cards.
Sue, can I interrupt you for just a moment? Natalie,
Sure.
you have your hand raised. Did you want to ask a question?
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, we
Yes,
can,
we can hear you
Natalie.
now.
Back to the last card on confidentiality. When a person tells you personal stuff and they're depressed, but they go further into about being not only scared, but feel confident in telling me on a lot of the stuff that he's been doing to her, you know? But how do you report that as, if it's confidentiality, do you put that in the EHR reporting, or do you just put it on the contact form of what was said, or do you report it to your boss? 'Cause a
And
lot of the
that's
stuff
a,
is confidential. That they
yep,
tell me.
that's a great question, Natalie. And in general, I think it's up to your actual program to decide how you want to document that confidential information. And locally, working together with your social services or your child protection or adult protection units in what's actually considered a mandated report and what wouldn't be considered a mandated report is a really great way to kind of get more specific program level and community level answers to those questions. I'm sorry, I can't really direct you specifically to how you should do it. I think remembering that the health record is a protected document as well, that others don't have access to seeing that health record. So working with your supervisor or your leadership in your program to decide how you plan to document that and how you should handle mandated reporting if something falls into that category.
Yeah, because I had one client, every time I met up with her, she hasn't ate for like 3 days. This is about a year ago, and I don't remember how I documented it or even put it in an EHR. But also I help her get something to eat.
Yeah.
But this is an ongoing thing. How confidential, how do I break confidentiality when she's stuck in this situation?
Right. Well, and again, I would suggest you talk a little bit more with your supervisor about it, but documenting it in an electronic health record isn't breaking confidentiality because that health record is protected health information as well. But every program does it just a little bit differently. So.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. I just want to go over again some of the important points of what your role is at the home as a home visitor. And as I mentioned before, the goal is not disclosure. And the goal is to be supportive. Oftentimes, someone may need to talk about their healthy or unhealthy relationship 3 or 4 times before they're willing to take any action. And one model has kind of looked into this a little bit closer and has discovered that it's usually at least 10 or more home visits before a woman will disclose that she's in an unhealthy relationship. And that has to do with trust and relationship building. We need to remember, as we're being supportive, that the woman is the expert on what's safest for her and her children, even though we as helpers sometimes just want them to leave the situation. We need to be very respectful and know that they're the expert in what is safest for them and for their children. We want them to know that we're a safe person. That's why sharing the cards and saying, if you or a friend or a family member is ever in a situation where your relationship feels unhealthy, you can know that I'm a safe person to talk to. I, again, acknowledge their decisions. So even saying to them, I know that you're the expert in what's safest for you, and I trust that you'll make decisions based on what's safest for you and for your family. And then connecting them to additional resources. Sometimes during a conversation that's just about universal education, a woman may disclose that she is in an unhealthy relationship. And then it's really important to make sure that you're acknowledging that and responding to them in a positive way. So you might want to think about, what is your response when someone says, yes, I am in an unhealthy relationship? And that's another thing you can role play or practice with a partner. But thinking about some ways that you might respond to that, you could say something like, I'm so sorry this is happening to you. No one deserves to be treated that way. Or you could say, that must be so scary. It takes courage to be able to talk about this. Thank you for sharing with me. And then to make sure that they understand you support their decision-making, saying, I want to be supportive and I want you to know that there is help available. Is there anything that I could do today that would be helpful to you? And the universal part, you might want to say, you're not alone. many people experience violence in their lives, but that doesn't make it okay. And then thinking about ways that you can connect them to services. We often talk about a warm handoff to someone, and even during a virtual visit, that's something that's possible. You might say something like, if you would like, I can put you on the phone right now with our local advocacy center, and they have women's advocates who are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, who can help you to make a plan to be safer. One way that you can do that is if you have a cell phone and they have a cell phone, if you're initiating the call, you can put together a 3-way call. So you can have, if you call the advocacy agency in your area, you can have you as the home visitor, the client, and the advocate all on a call together. And if you initiate that call from your phone, it can't be traced on your client's phone. So that would be a safe way to connect them to additional resources. We also need to remember that this is hard work for home visitors, and it's very stressful on home visitors. So we kind of need to think a little bit about how we define and maybe even redefine safety. Remember that leaving or ending an abusive relationship comes with the highest likelihood for homicide or acute victimization. And your client knows that, and that's why we need to trust them to do what's safest. Staying might be their safest choice, and we have to be respectful of that if that's what they choose. We need to kind of move away from asking ourselves, why hasn't this person left this situation, and reframe that and think about, how can I be supportive to this person so that they can make their own decisions on how to be safe. It's also a good idea, if you don't already, know the local advocates in your area, to get to know them. They really are the experts in helping clients with long-term and short-term safety plans, and being able to know that person, know who they are and what they do, and provide that warm handoff is a good thing to do. And then when we think about safety, we also need to remember that probably the biggest reason that women don't disclose that they're in an abusive relationship is for fear of losing their children. They may have been told over and over again that if they ever tell anyone about the violence, that they'll make sure that they never see their kids again. And that's a very real fear. And that really drives most moms to not want to share. So that's an important thing to remember as well. Oops. As I mentioned, building partnerships with your local advocacy centers and the local advocates in your area is a great way to work together. If you haven't already, now might be a great time to plan a meeting to introduce yourselves and to figure out and explore ways that you can work together. Self-care is really important during this time as well. It's stressful to work with women who have in unhealthy relationships. Family home visiting in general is stressful work. And we need to make sure that we're taking care of ourselves. It's really important to have a space for reflection, whether you reflect with your supervisor or you have a group, a reflection group, or you use one of your peers. It's a really cost-effective and helpful way to reduce your staff stresses. It's safe and non-judgmental, and it's a place where you as the home visitor can talk about how difficult this work is and share some of your struggles and have support in working through them. It really is a strengths-based approach, and it gives that positive regard and that affirmation of you as a caring individual. And it helps teams as well. Other things besides reflection that you can do to take care of yourself is maybe take some mindfulness training or think about relaxation techniques. And as always, work real hard on setting healthy boundaries, both personally and professionally. And then the last points I want to cover here just talks a little bit about referral sources. So whether a woman discloses or doesn't disclose, you could certainly utilize all of these resources. Local advocates are certainly a great resource for women to be able to talk to and to help make a safer plan. As I mentioned, the United Way 211 can be a great support for everything from food to transportation, to parenting to support. And again, as that safer proxy for giving someone access to support for their relationships stress. Day one is Minnesota's crisis line, and that's for anyone experiencing domestic violence, sexual assault, or sexual violence, human trafficking, or simply if they have questions about aspects of their relationships. And on Minnesota Day one, advocates are available again 24/7 to listen and give information and resources. And then, mandated reporting, as I mentioned, get familiar with how mandated or what mandated reporting looks like with your human services or social services agencies, how you fit into that, how those reports are made, and what's happening locally in your area. Some additional resources that are in the handout that I provided as well are some telehealth resources. These include the safety card that I talked about, the safety during a public health crisis card. They also include posters and sample scripts, like some of the scripts I shared today. They also have some Zoom backgrounds that you can use that have like the Day one numbers on or United Way 211 numbers on that you can use. And those telehealth resources were developed by the Minnesota Catalyst Project, which is Violence Free Minnesota is one of the co-sponsors for that work here in Minnesota. Safe Harbor is also another resource to be aware of. In Minnesota, there are 9 regional navigators located in communities across the state to help with youth and sex trafficking issues. The Minnesota Safe Harbor laws have increased awareness, understanding, and identification of commercial and sexual exploitation of youth. And it protects those who are 24 years of age and younger from being arrested or prosecuted for prostitution. So it views those youth as victims and not as perpetrators. And so that's another resource for you to be aware of. And then local advocates, not only as a resource for your clients, but as a resource for you. You as a home visitor can share or can have time to talk with them and to understand more about the culture of violence and the culture of unhealthy relationships. And with that, I just want to thank you for the time to present today. Carla did ask also that I talk just briefly about ASQ and ASQ-SE. And I just kind of want to mention that we are offering quarterly training, and it's an online live training for home visitors on both the ASQ and the ASQ-SE. And there are actually 2 trainings, one on ASQ and one on ASQ-SE coming up later in April. I think April 20th and 27th, and then we will be repeating them again quarterly. So they'll be repeated again in June. And you can register for those trainings from the MDH Family Home Visiting page under Training and Professional Development Resources and under e-learning. And I did not include that link in the resources, but Carla certainly can get you that link for registering as well. And as I mentioned, there's currently 3 family home visiting consultants across the state, myself, Carla, and Julie Myrie, who works out of the Duluth office. And I will cut and paste our emails into the chat as well. And then also know that our health.homevisiting@state.mn.us is another email that's always available for you for questions. Somebody's always monitoring that email and can direct them to the correct person. I know Carla and I are both partially reassigned to MDH's COVID response, so sometimes we aren't as quick to get back to you as we'd like to be, but those are just options for contacting us. And I'm happy to try to answer any questions. And with that, I guess I'll open it up.
Great, thank you, Sue. I just wanted to pull up a couple things from the chat. So one question was if folks can have a copy of this slide deck.
Yes, we certainly, I have a PDF of the slide deck that can be made available as long as, and also the resource sheet. Carla, I don't know if you want to send those out, I can certainly get them to you and you can send them out to folks.
Yeah, that'll work just fine. We can send them out with I'll get them to Tara and we'll send them out with the rest of our slides from today and our information that we send out after each of our webinars here. So thank you so much, Sue. This was wonderful information, really valuable, and knowing that folks have another tool for their toolbox and one that's been widely normed in our communities is really helpful to know about. Thank you so much. And also for the information about the ASQ training. We really encourage every one of our home visitors to take that training, even if you don't necessarily use the tool right now. It's free, it's online, and it was a very changed my practice when I started using that in home visiting. It really did help to build relationships. So thank you again, Sue.
Yeah, and then another thing I wanted to ask too, so there is some discussion in the chat box about serving male survivors of domestic violence and how challenging it can be to do screenings with males because of the stigma and, you know, shame, that kind of stuff. Is there anything, Sue, that you can, any comments you can make on, you know, tips for screening male survivors?
I think some of the information about being supportive, you know, it pertains regardless of gender. You know, that yes, it's more common in women, but it's not uncommon in men, you know, so knowing for some of the statistics, like 1 in 9 men, that's still a lot, you know, and reassuring them again that they're not alone and that you're a safe person to talk to. I would also really encourage you to talk with your local advocacy programs, because sometimes some of those programs have materials and suggestions specific for one gender or the other. And, you know, that's another option for getting local resources or talking to someone locally and what's available locally. Obviously, Day One also would be a resource. There's advocates there that they could talk to, and they would have more information about things that might be specific toward men. Again, just acknowledging how difficult it is and what courage it takes to disclose, and thank them for sharing that information with you. And again, asking them, is there something that would be helpful that I can do now? Because they too are the best judge of what's safe for them and what it is that they need. So not anything real specific, but hopefully that helps a little.
Thank you. I want to just open it up to the group and see if you have any ideas or thoughts around screening in general, and then, you know, potentially screening male survivors. So any thoughts? And Susan made a good point in the chat. And I know Susan also mentioned reflective consultation. So definitely reflective supervision or consultation is a wonderful resource for staff. You know, just recognizing that as home visitors, we are paraprofessionals, right? So we're not clinical providers in doing this work with survivors of domestic violence or sexual assault or any type of violence. And it can be, you know, it can be pretty wearing on us. So being mindful of your boundaries and your resources, particularly your team. I know Birdie has talked a lot about the support that her team has from her, but then also from each other. And we have seen that in the research around sustainability of staff and paraprofessionals, that support and that reflective supervision or reflective consultation is one of those key components for reducing burnout amongst us that provide services to families.
Rick is in a program called Fatherhood Project. And I looked it up, and there are fatherhood projects all over the United States. So that could also be another resource for family home visitors to be looking at, to refer their men to if there's a group in the area for them. Rick and our Mike, who's on leave right now, are in this fatherhood project, and they're getting ready to start their own groups. So that is another thing. But the thing is, with men, it's so hard because they don't say much. You can sometimes tell something's not right by how quiet they are. Men tend to get pretty quiet when they're around their partners and there's something not quite right. Or get reclusive, or sometimes get really super violent, you know, with other people other than their partner. So it's really quite hard for a home visitor too. If you're female, sometimes that makes it a little bit harder too, because I ran into one that was being, one of our clients that was being abused by his wife. And I figured it out. And I started talking to him, being nice, trying to figure out exactly, you know, what I could do to help him or how I could help the family. And it kind of went almost the other way on me. And I ended up having to get a male involved because it was like my niceness that turned into something that he thought was, you know, a little bit different, trying to get romantic about it. And I had to explain to him that isn't, you know, that I'm nice to everybody, but got a man involved anyway. So yeah, we have to be very careful with certain things. Same with the females, you know, with the males who work in with families, you got to be very careful.
Thank you, Bertie. That's a great point. Awesome. So I know that Sue put the ASQ link, training link in the chat, but I'll also include it in our email. I also wanted to remind you all, and Carla brought this up with me this week, is that MDH is hosting an introduction to mental health consultation training. And so that also goes along with kind of that infant or working in mental health space with youth too. And so that might be a really great opportunity. So wonderful. Thank you, everybody. I'm gonna transition back over to our slides, but if there are any other questions or thoughts that you want to share, please feel free to chime in or use the chat either way. And I know Sue talked a little bit about virtual visits with domestic violence screenings, or doing screenings via virtual home visits for domestic violence. And I also wanted to point out this really great resource. So some of you may have joined us, but the Rapid Response Home Visiting Coalition is a team of different models across the United States who gathered last year to really quickly and timely provide resources and training for doing home visits in the era of COVID, right? So transitioning to virtual visits and kind of what that looks like. And so as we've been going along the year, we've been providing these webinars and tools and trainings for sites and for health educators on these different topics. And one of them is doing screenings and virtual home visits. So I know Sue talked a lot about domestic violence screenings, but I wanted to touch on these virtual screenings more general, right? And just kind of, you know, acknowledging that it is challenging because we're not in the house, right? We're not visually there to kind of take in the entire environment, which our instincts and our impression of everything going on really leads into a lot of our, you know, determining kind of what kind of support we're going to give families. And when we're in the virtual environment, that could be a little bit different, right? So, you know, I know we brought up concerns around safety, like, well, what about, you know, I don't have my eyes on the kiddos, so what if something's going on and I can't identify it because I don't see them? Or how do I get the training, or not the training, but the screening form to the family? I have to do it in paper, so how am I going to get it to them, right? So these are some things that have come up as we've been doing screenings in the virtual environment, we're seeing that there's some transition to going back to in-person, right? But this virtual visits, we don't expect it to go away. There might be some form of virtual visits or remote visits that we'll do in some capacity in the future. So kind of getting familiar and comfortable doing screenings virtually or remotely is going to be super helpful for health educators. Natalie, I see you're unmuted. Did you want to chime in? Oh, okay. Feel free to if you want to. So some of the opportunities, right, that we have for doing these visits or doing these screenings virtually, we still can, you know, help families feel empowered in taking the lead in assessing their own children's mental health, their development, and their well-being, right? So, you know, really pumping them up and saying, okay, this is a really great opportunity because you're with your family. We're going to acknowledge that they're the experts in their family. They're the experts in their kiddos, and what they feel, their instincts, their gut instincts, and what they notice. That's so valuable. And we're really going to be working as a team to do these screenings and assessments because moms and dads are the eyes and ears, right? And what we're going to focus on is kind of helping them learn to what to look for and those observation skills. And then for us, you know, kind of our facilitation and coaching skills around those screenings, it gives us an opportunity to learn how to do things differently and to improve our own styles. We want to be mindful of our tone and our expressions, and we also want to really be mindful of our active listening skills, because that's all we have, right? We're not in the home to see everything that's going on. But it also gives us the opportunity to really build on our knowledge of child development skills in helping families feel empowered. So a couple things I wanted to point out here is there is a document, a tool that is really helpful. Let me see if I could pull it up really quickly. Just to show you guys. And then there is a recorded webinar, that is available if you want to kind of view that, and it'll help with some of these concepts. So let me just pull this up really quickly so that I can share it. And it's got a lot of good information. So I'm not going to go through the entire thing, but it gives some really detailed kind of tips and tricks to doing virtual screenings, whether they're child development, domestic violence, depression, all that good stuff. Okay. And so we see this here. It tells us how. I know that Sue talked a little bit about a script. So there is some language in here, an example script to use so that you know, when we're introducing those lessons or introducing those screenings, kind of how we can help families understand the importance of them and why we're even doing them virtually. And then there's also some resources down here at the bottom for each of those different types of screenings, and then tools that we can use to, you know, support families who have concerns about child development and whatnot, okay? So I'm going to send this out. Well, I think I sent it out, but I will resend it out as well so that you all have that. And along with the link to the recorded webinar on that topic. Are there any questions here? Any thoughts? All right. Let's keep on keeping on. So next, and as you know, we've been going along today, we've been talking a lot about tools, right? So building your toolbox. We are not the end all be all for families. We've talked a lot about that over many days, many sessions, and just the work that we do. And so we are kind of hoping to help you all feel that your toolbox is going to be built up with some of these. And one of this is, you know, we wanted to talk a little bit about how we go into the home, or when we approach these screenings, families are like, why are we even doing this? Like, what's the point, right? Or they might have questions about the screening and might have questions about this topic area, for example, domestic violence or depression or whatnot. And so we wanted to open up the opportunity to develop a frequently asked questions for families. So something that you can take out to families that might be like, hey, this is a lot of what we get from families or from participants. And so we wanted to share it with you so you feel informed and comfortable when we ask these questions on the screening, because some of them are super sensitive, right? And so we just want to do what we can to help families feel that we're being transparent. You know, what's going to happen with that data? Where's it going to go? Where's my information going to be? Who's going to get it? You know, that kind of stuff. We didn't build these out because we wanted to really make them individualized to your site. And the things that you as home visitors are, the questions, common questions that you're getting or that you anticipate getting from families. So this is something that we wanted to open up as an opportunity. If you are interested in developing the frequently asked questions around screenings in general, right? Or a specific screening or specific category, then we can meet with you one-on-one, either Steve Bonet or myself, to talk a little bit about creating these for your site and your program on the tools or the screenings that you use. And then next is talking a little bit about what happens after we do a screening. And I know that Serene left, but she kind of touched on this, right? So what about, how do we know what is positive and what's not positive in the screening? Where's the kind of the matrix or the cheat sheet that goes along with it, and what happens next? And so kind of discussing a little bit about closing that loop. And I think that that's the hardest part, right? We get out there, we do the screening, it comes up that there's a challenge or a concern. Well, what happens now? And sometimes in the shuffle of things, or if we don't have the resources or the skills or tools, it kind of just gets lost. It gets filed in the chart and nothing gets followed up on, right? So we want to kind of close that loop on the other end. So once we do the screening and once we evaluate it according to whatever scoring is necessary, then what's next? Well, we definitely have to report it, right? So depending on the screening, depending on the assessment, we're going to document that we did it. It might go into the chart. We might have done it electronically. And then we want to alert, if there is a positive screening, we want to alert, potentially our supervisor or a clinician. Maybe it's the mental health provider or the a medical provider about, the screening. And then we want to provide referrals and preferably warm handoffs to resources in the community. And so another tool that we wanted to share with you all was a referral, like a resource outline tool. So some of you, we've talked a little bit about having a community resource binder or book or website, but what happens when we have a positive screening? What are we gonna do and who are we gonna send them to, right? So I'm gonna pull this one up, and again, this is one that we filled in a little bit with national resources, but we wanted it to be very specific to your site and your local resources so that you could outline what is available in your area. And so here we have, those 5 buckets of different types of assessments. And then we have starting out with just the national resources, so that it kind of gets you started. But then ideally what you would do is you would continue listing out here, and these resource agencies would be, for depression and mental health. Maybe it's your behavioral health department. And how do you get a hold of them? Maybe there is, there's a county organization or county resource that you want to list on here for each of these. So this is going to be something that I think I sent it out to you, but I forgot to provide the version that had the national stuff. So I'm going to provide this as well, so that if it's helpful for you, you can go in and fill in. And then that way you have something like a cheat sheet that when you're in the home or when you're back at the office or after you do the screening virtually, you want to provide a resource to the family, or you want to do a warm handoff or a formal referral, then you have this list of agencies or programs available to you in one place, right? The other one that I wanted to share, which is provided by the Rapid Resource Network, is more of like a brainstorming tool. So I guess it might go before you list out all of this stuff, but it's really helpful as a team to kind of just jot everything down. So this is a community mapping tool, and this really looks at resources in general, and it's a really great, just different way to brainstorm on different resources, in resource buckets. So fuel and utilities, home visiting programs, parent-child support, safety and health, nutrition and food, and then shelter and housing, right? So this is just another way to look at it and another tool to use when you're kind of assessing what resources are available in your local, like tribal or local community, county, state, and then national. Okay, let's see. I want to get back over here to this one. Any questions about all this good stuff? Does everybody feel like, on a scale of 1 to 10, if you have a positive screening for either, for example, depression or child development or substance use, do you feel that you have the resources needed to do a referral for your family? on a scale of 1 to 10? How comfortable do you feel? Natalie's a 9. Great, Natalie. Thank you. And so those folks that are in your areas, these folks got it down, right? And so kind of connecting with them to say, hey, you know, I might, and I know we have some newer home visitors in our group as well. I know our folks from Ashkemanadu. I know you all were looking into home visiting. Zoran, I know you work with your elders, but you're new to working with families. I know a couple of our home visitors are new, and so these are folks that you go to, you know, your network, like, hey, I have this family, this is what's going on. Who do you think would be a great referral for them, right? And so then you can lean on your team or your network. Here, it could be local, or it could be those folks in the community of practice that are here, maybe not in your area, but in the state with you. And then another, you know, component or the next step would be, how do I connect families with these resources? And we've talked a little bit about referrals and stuff like that, but as always, the warm handoff is the golden standard, right? If I can say, hey, you know, family, I'm going to introduce you to Natalie at Leech Lake. She's amazing. I'm going to call her and tell her you're coming, or we can call together, right? That's always the gold standard, but that's not always available. And so really, when you outline these agencies and organizations that you're going to use for resources, and knowing kind of what are the steps to getting services, who do you talk to, what are their hours, what is the agency, if they have to go there, what does parking look like, right? All these things that we can do to reduce the anxiety that families might have in accessing those services is going to be very helpful and make it much more likely that they will be successful. Susan says, made the screenings and not had to make a referral, and that's amazing, right? So if everything's all good, we're just kind of checking in, that's wonderful. And she's a 9 because she's worked as a teacher and principal, so she's kind of going on up there. So wonderful, thank you for sharing that, Susan. All right. And I'll send those tools out as well. So then we wanted to bring this again, kind of full circle. This Building Resiliency series has talked a lot about trauma-informed approaches to home visiting, right? So we've learned, probably outside of this, we're all familiar with trauma-informed care and the fact that it is, oh great, thanks Natalie, that's a great idea. And the fact that trauma-informed care is often thought of as clinical. And so with this series, we wanted to bring it into the home visiting spectrum. And how do we use those approaches and translate them into the work that we're doing as home visitors? Because we're not clinical, we're not in the medical department, or we're not having families, bringing families into behavioral health for visits. We're going out to the house, and so how can we bring those ideas and translate them to home visiting? And so with screening, there's not a whole lot of information on using trauma-informed approaches to screening outside of trauma screenings, like the ACEs, right? And so we wanted to propose this question to you all because as a team, as a group, the community of practice, we are the experts in home visiting. This is what we do. We're doing it every day, or you all are doing it every day. And so how can we use the experiences and the knowledge that is so valuable within this group to really look at doing these screenings and assessments in a trauma-informed way, or a way that will reduce trauma for us as home visitors, but also for our families. And so I wanted to open up this question and see what everybody's thoughts were. So considering, you know, what we've learned during this series about trauma-informed approaches and what you all had brought in the knowledge that you had, what are some ideas for ways that we can do screenings and assessments in a way that considers trauma? Doesn't, you know, that we want to take a trauma-informed approach to it. So I'm going to stop here for a moment and see what y'all think. Hey, Juanita, I saw that you were unmuted for a second. Did you want to chime in?
I guess I will. I'm a reluctant, but I think just, you know, just being client-centered and assuming that everyone has had some level of trauma and that you're approaching people in a gentle, kind, informative way, and not using judgments while we're dealing with these human beings.
I like that you said client-centered and that we are kind of approaching it from a universal approach, right? So we do these screenings for everybody every 3 months that they're in the program, right? And then that way the family doesn't think like, oh, they think something's wrong with me, so they're gonna screen me for depression. Well, we screen everybody for depression because it helps us, helps us share information. So we're providing education, we're providing a little bit of prevention, and we're taking a universal approach. That is definitely one way to support introducing these assessments in a way that is trauma-informed and that we're not kind of making judgments on them, right? Susan said, I'd like to know who the team is who works with clients and we have access to their contacts when needed. Consider their history with screenings and what has happened to them because of those. That's a great one, Nidra. So being mindful that a lot of our families may be fearful of engaging or answering questions because they're afraid that we're going to call CPS, right? Or, I know one thing I like to point out is when I did home safety, there was a question on there that said, do you have any guns in the home? And in 10, 12 years of doing home visits, not one time did anybody say that they had guns in the house. And I know dang well that somebody had a gun in the house in 12 years of all these families that I saw, right? And so, that just goes to show that some of these questions are not going to be successful because people are fearful of judgment, fearful that we're going to call CPS or that something's going to happen, right? Although with that particular question, they usually would tell me later on that they did after we built the relationship. But knowing that the first time that you do the assessment they might not be super forthcoming, but then as your relationship grows, maybe the next 3 months time that you do it, they'll be more forthcoming, right? But understanding that there is a fear of being CPS and all that stuff. And so being clear on and transparent when you're doing these assessments and letting families know your role as a mandated reporter and why we're doing these. What is the purpose of this, right? I'm not just trying to dig into your life and be curious about what's going on with you. So thanks, Nidra. That's a good one. A couple of other things to point out. And I know that Carla said, pointing out what Birdie had said is in terms of going with families. So that's a trauma-informed approach, right? Offering to say like, hey, I know that, you have this appointment coming up. We're going to refer you to see the behavioral health provider. Are you comfortable going? Is there something I can do to support you in going? And sometimes that might mean like, I'll accompany you to the first visit, or I'll sit in the waiting room with you while you're waiting. That's always a really good option too, because that waiting time could be very stressful for families or for folks. And then, so some additional ideas that we had that we wanted to share were, be mindful and aware of the timing. If their husband just went to jail last night, it's not the time to do a domestic violence screening, right? Or if they, you haven't seen him in 2 months and you come into the home and they're like, well, I fell off the wagon and I've been using for the past month. Well, then that might be not the time to do, a child development assessment. So kind of being mindful and aware of the timing and if it's appropriate to do, to sit down and ask those questions at that time. And then we want to inform the participant about the purpose of the screening and where their information is going so that they understand that we're not just trying to be nosy about their lives. And then asking permission. It could be challenging because we're very pressured to turn in all of this data and evaluation around these screenings. But at the end of the day, it's voluntary. Families don't have to engage. And that is their choice and it's their right. And it's important that we respect that. And so really asking permission to do these screenings, not just walking in there and saying, okay, today I'm going to ask you all these questions about depression, but being mindful and saying like, this is what I have to do. Are you comfortable with this? Or may I ask your permission to complete this survey? And then during the discussion or during the assessment, you know, we learned so much about families. Sometimes families will really open up and tell us a lot about what's been going on with them. And so during this time, we want to be, number one, very grateful that they feel comfortable enough to talk with us, but then just remaining calm and open during that discussion. We want to be mindful of our own intense reactions and not like, oh my God, you know, it's so awful that you've experienced that, and just overreacting because maybe it's something that it's surprising to you or upsetting to you to hear. We want to be calm and supportive to them and just be a little bit aware of our own reactions. We want to offer support we want to offer resources, right? Options for resources, and then asking permission to make a referral. Sometimes I know I worked as an advocate with human trafficking services, and sometimes case managers would send me the referral, the information, and then I would call the person, the survivor, and they would not even have any clue that I was going to be calling or that I had their information or anything. And so asking permission to make that referral, asking permission to say, may I give them your name and number to call you, or may I complete this referral form with you, so that they're aware that they may be getting a call back from somebody or whatnot. We want to respect participants' decisions. So I know that Sue mentioned this during the earlier presentation about, you know, domestic violence, and sometimes folks don't want to leave. You know, sometimes they're not ready to engage in mental health services, or they're not ready to look at medication for whatever's going on with them. And so we may not agree, but we have to respect their decision, and we want to be comfortable in that, and just, you know, always support what their decisions are. And then definitely, as I mentioned earlier, just engaging in reflective supervision, because this can be very triggering. We are community health workers, we're in the community, and we may have experienced some of the same traumas that our participants have. And so hearing their stories and disclosures may be very triggering for us. So knowing what your resources are and who you can talk to about that, if that happens. Are there any other ideas for doing screenings and assessments?
I think there's a couple more things in the chat from Susan and Nidra that are really awesome points.
Oh, I did talk a little bit about that. Definitely it's about getting, considering why people might be scared to talk, right? Because we could have CPS. They may be worried that we're going to call CPS. So I think I did touch on those.
Thank you. I just wanted to make sure everybody felt like their comments were heard. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Awesome. Thank you, everybody. Okay, so that, for those of us who've been together through the community of practice this last year, right, because we've been doing it for the last year, and we've had 3 main series. This is the 3rd series, Building Resilience in Home Visiting and looking at trauma-informed approaches. And so this session concludes that series. So what we're looking at is the conclusion of our community of practice this month, and it'll be a year since we've been together and since we've been doing this work, and it has changed quite a bit since we initially started, right? Because our hope was at the beginning was to come together in person 3 times this year, but that didn't happen. So we ended up being able to see each other much more often virtually. But so we want to host a gratitude or harvest session at the end of this month on April 30th. We'll talk a little bit about gratitude kits that we are going to be sending out, and an evaluation that we will be sharing and asking for your input. So there's the same link, same place, same time, 10 a.m. On Zoom, same link, but we will be meeting for our final session on Friday, April 30th, so the end of this month. And we have been working to build a gratitude kit for everybody to send out that touches on a lot of the topics that we've talked about throughout the last year. So we'll be talking a little bit more about that when we meet on the 30th and how we'll be distributing those. So as we conclude, are there any other questions or thoughts or concerns? Thank you, Carla.
I just
saw
want to
the
say
PowerPoint.
thank you to Tara for the sessions throughout the year. I've learned so much from you and really reinforced some things that I did know, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And we will be distributing a link at the last session for evaluations, because we want to know kind of what your ideas are for moving on, like what's next, what would be helpful for everybody, and what you really enjoyed about this series or this community of practice, what you wished we had done differently, that kind of good stuff. So all of your thoughts and experiences will be very valuable and helpful to us.
Yep, that is really important. So we're hoping that you can all join us for the harvest session on April 30th. We do tentatively have Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, who kicked off the series a whole year ago, and then wants to be able to join us to wish us well as we move forward. So she is on the docket to give us a note. Of course, her schedule can change, but so far so good. We do have her on the schedule. And just know that your evaluation will be really important. And we don't want this work to end. You know, like Natalie said, I want everybody's email, and we want to be able to keep in touch. We want to be able to be supports for each other doing this work, because sometimes, especially for, you know, I'm sure the Metro people feel this too. I can't speak to that. I've never lived and worked there, but I know living and working in rural areas, sometimes we feel kind of alone doing this work. And so being able to connect with others is so important. It's our piece of reflective practice, right? It's our support system. So we want to, as we move forward, we want to work together with our team at Johns Hopkins to be able to provide this continuing education and support, and we'll let you guys decide what that looks like and how we move forward. So we'll be excited to hear your feedback on the 30th, and there'll be other chances too. So thank you in advance for sharing any feedback and your honesty and as such, and what you would like going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Carla. All right, everybody. So I am gonna hit stop recording.